I'm Charlotte Dubin. I'm conducting an oral history interview with Hugh Greenberg for the Leonard N. Simons Jewish Community Archives at the Max M. Fisher Federation Building on June 20th, 2005. Mr. Greenberg, you've made many important contributions to our community. Do we have permission to use your words and thoughts in the future for educational and historical research and documentation?
Sure.
The beginning. When and where were you born?
I was born in Detroit on April 16th, 1930, in Women's Hospital. I wanted to be near my mother. That's why I did it.
Well, speaking of your mother, tell me about your parents.
Well, my mother, her maiden name was Teresa Kyle, and she was born in New York City to parents who were from Vienna, William and Hester Kyle. She was grew up in Detroit after coming here at an early age. As a matter of fact, she went to work for an insurance agency after she got out of high school, which my father happened to own, and that's how they met. And she married my dad. And my father's family came from, well, my dad was born in Petoskey, and the family had come from Traverse City originally and had a stint trying to farm in North Dakota, which was a total disaster. They almost starved to death and froze to death up there. But then they moved back to Traverse City, and my grandparents were married there. They were first cousins, which may explain some of the insanity in our family. But in any case, then they moved to Petoskey. My grandfather went into business there after he had been a lumberjack. He then became a peddler, as his father was in Traverse City. And after that, they opened up a sort of what we call a general store today in Petoskey. And that's where my father was born. My great-grandfather was a charter member of the synagogue in Traverse City. He was one of the founders. And my grandfather was a charter member of the temple in Petoskey. Both temples, incidentally, still exist and are continuously ever since. So that's where my parents got where they came from. And my father moved to Detroit in about 1912, I think, 11 or 12, and the family went into the insurance business, and they built a nice insurance business in Detroit, which lasted for about almost 60 years. And that's the story of my parents.
I'm going to go back to your great-grandparents for a moment. Where were they from, and how did they find their way to America?
It's not really clear. They came from what was Bessarabia at that time, a town called Kishinev. At least this is my great-grandfather, who came here with his three sons, one of whom was my grandfather. And they went to Traverse City because they had relatives there, which were the Sandelman family. I don't know how the Sandelmans came to this country. They were there maybe a couple of years earlier. And they came over on Greek passports. Nobody seems to know why or how. The story my father told me was he thought they were all forged passports. Their name was not really Greenberg. They evidently, their name actually had been Himmler, believe it or not. Great name not to have. And they came to this country, I think in the late 1870s, actually. There's some dispute as to exactly when it happened, but that's what sounds right to us. We put all the facts together. And subsequently, my grandfather, who had come to this country, married his cousin, who was Minnie Sandelman in Traverse City. And that's how that beginnings were. It was interesting, I could just tell you this, that my grandfather maintained a kosher house up in Petoskey. And they kept it kosher because all the visiting Jewish people from all over the state and from all around stopped at their house. That was kind of the stopping place for people who wanted to go up north. And out of respect for them, they maintained a kosher house. which was quite interesting because my grandfather was totally irreligious. He he knew a lot about Judaism, and he knew historically everything there was to know about Judaism, but he never really was a believer. But he maintained a kosher home, which was interesting.
What was the Jewish community like? Did they ever tell you?
In Petoskey?
Mm-hmm.
I understand it was really quite a burgeoning community. There were quite a few Jews up there. I remember some of the names of the people that my father always mentioned, some of whom spent their lives there, lived there. He had a friend up there whose name was Zalman Freiman, who was his best boyfriend when he was a little boy. And I happened to be up in Petoskey a few years ago, and I said to my wife, I said, I wonder whatever happened to Zalman Freiman. We used to visit him all the time when we went up there. And I opened up the paper from Petoskey, and there on the front page was the announcement that he had died. Mm-hmm. It was really kind of eerie. But that was a long friendship from up there. And but there were quite a number of Jewish families, and they enough so that they started a synagogue. I mean, if you go up and look at the synagogue, it really wasn't much of a synagogue. But it's an interesting history. I was up there a couple of years ago, and we happened to go in the back door of the synagogue, and right next to the door there's a little plaque. Well, it's not really a plaque. It's kind of a framed little handwritten document in which it announces that a Purim play is going to be held, and the dates, and then it gives the names of all the children who are participating in the. And I look at this thing, and all my aunts and uncles' names are listed there, but not my father's. And I was kind of taken aback. And then I looked at the date on the document. It was 1896. My father hadn't been born yet. He wasn't born until 1900. These were his older brothers and sisters who were participating in this play. And it's still sitting there by the back door in Petoskey, so I got a kick out of that.
Well, you were born in Detroit.
Oh,
How
yes.
did they find their way down to Detroit?
Well, the story that I was told is that my father had 3 maiden sisters, and they felt that there weren't any potential husbands for them up in Petoskey, and that civilization really was moving to the big city, which was Detroit. So they moved for that reason, and large measure because not only that there were business opportunities here, but they also wanted to find husbands for their daughters, which they did. They all got married, and that's when my father and grandfather went into the insurance business. So,
Tell me what life was like for you in your home. What was that?
when I was a kid,
Growing up.
well, I was born in the Depression. I'm born in 1930. That was not a great time to be born. But having heard all of the horror stories of the Depression, I came to the conclusion that I was really quite privileged. I lived very well compared to what many other people did. My father was in business, and it became a struggle for him, but he still managed to make a living, not a fabulous living. Before the Depression, my grandfather and father had been very wealthy, actually. They had built up a wonderful business, and they had bought property, and they were doing quite well. But the Depression they lost all the property, and they lost everything they had, except their business, which they kept. And they struggled, but I lived relatively well. I mean, I was never really deprived of anything, although my father was struggling in business, but we still ate regularly. We lived in a nice house, and so I really didn't, other than knowing what was going on in the Depression and hearing my father talk about it and how terrible things were, I didn't really suffer like many others did.
Did you have siblings? Brothers and sisters?
I have a sister. I have one sister. Her name's Barbara Fleischman. She lives in New York City now. She was married to another prominent member of the Detroit community, Larry Fleischman, who was a very important person in Detroit. He was the president of the Detroit Arts Commission. He built the South Wing. He organized the building of the South Wing of the Detroit Arts Museum, and he was very active in the Jewish community too while he was here. But they moved away. Maybe must be 38 or 39 years ago. He became an art dealer. He was very much interested in the arts, and they opened up a gallery in New York. And he passed away, and my sister still lives there, and is very active in the New York community. So.
Was your family close? Are you with your sister? Did you have fun together? What did you do?
When we were kids, we sure did. But she's about 6 years older than I am, so I was kind of the brat brother. She was the older sister, and she tolerated me. But we've stayed reasonably close over the years. Since she moved to New York, of course, we're not as close as we used to be, but we still talk to each other regularly and see each other at important occasions. So.
Were there Jewish observances in your home? Was there any celebration of Shabbat, holidays, things like that?
We celebrated all the holidays, not all the holidays, all the main holidays. We Passover and Purim sometimes, and we had no Shabbat celebrations at all in our house. We didn't. As I said, we were not a very observant family, by and large, although we were very Jewish. It was interesting that I always felt very dedicated to the Jewish community, the Jewish people, and suffered through all the trials and tribulations of our people. My dad did too. But when it came to the religious aspects or the traditional observances, we weren't really very observant at all.
Things like bar mitzvah, like synagogue.
We always belonged to a synagogue. My father was a charter member of Temple Israel, and I went to Sunday school, and I never was bar mitzvah. In those days, in Reform synagogues, there was no such thing as a bar mitzvah. That came much later. But I was confirmed, and I was active in the temple, in the youth group and stuff like that. But we were not what I would call a very observant family in terms of. I came from a family, quite honestly, that I would be kind, maybe I would say they were agnostics. I think my father was genuinely an atheist. I don't think he believed at all. I mean, and to his dying day, he didn't believe anything like that. But he was certainly dedicated to the Jewish community, to Jews everywhere, and gave generously, and was very active in the Detroit Jewish community. He was very involved with the Home for the Aged. He was on the board for, I don't know, it seemed to me he was on the board for 30 years. He was an officer. Went back when it was on Petoskey. And
remind me what his name was?
Samuel J. Greenberg. Mm-hmm. And he was I remember virtually every Sunday morning he left to go to the home, where in those days, the lay people had a lot more involvement with the operations of these agencies, although they had, very talented professionals. But in those days, the people on the board were really active. So it was they went every week to every Sunday morning. They out there making plans and doing things. So
and you're a very charitable man. Did any of this come out of your childhood and this?
Oh yeah, my father and mother. My mother was very active in Hadassah. Oh yes, we absolutely, it all came from there. I'm sure that it was always stressed that we were responsible for everybody else's well-being. Deccan Olam. So it was kind of an inbred thing, I should just tell you something funny. It just happened recently. It happened recently, but was just reminded of. Jenny Jones passed away a week or so ago, and Jenny Jones was a very dear friend of my mother's.
And she was well known for...
In this community? Oh, she was a dynamo. She was into everything. She was involved with the Federation, with Hadassah. She was a real... You talk about a woman activist. She was it.
She was president of the women's division, wasn't she?
Sure.
Yes.
That too. I don't know what else she didn't do, to tell you the truth. She was... But anyway, I remember I must have been 15 years old, and Hadassah was doing a mailing. And they were preparing the mailing in the basement of my house. And Jenny Jones was there with my mother and supervising. I was licking envelopes and putting postage stamps on it. And I must have been 13 years old or something like that. So when she passed away, I was reminded of the involvement of hers and, of course, of my mother's with her. So those were important days for getting used to the idea of charity and tzedakah and all that.
Now, it sounds as though that must have been in the middle of the Second World War. Do you recall?
1943, probably 44, near the end.
What was the Jewish community like where you were living and their response to the war?
That is a very interesting question. I was living on North Lawn, which was the heart of a Catholic neighborhood. There were very few Jews. I mean, in those days, I moved there in 1935. I was only 5 years old. So I grew up virtually in the neighborhood with nothing but Christian friends. I didn't know Jewish kids and that. And I was the butt of a lot of some overt and some not so overt anti-Semitism. These were the days when Father Coughlin was spouting off, and Gerald L.K. Smith and Henry Ford. These were the days when it was not easy to be Jewish. We had no federation. We had no unified Jewish community who could even speak against what was going on. It was interesting. That didn't come till later. And we suffered a lot in terms of feeling very, very helpless, and nobody was coming to our aid as a Jewish community, and we felt very threatened by all these virulent anti-Semites. So I remember that very well. And my father was a very pugnacious man, and he did not take that easily. He came from up north in a tough country, and he did not take it easily. So he was very outspoken about what his feelings were. And even in Washington, and when Franklin Roosevelt was president, there were Jews and they were very close to him, and they kept quiet mostly. They didn't speak out against, even the Holocaust. They felt powerless. Interesting time.
Did your father suffer for that?
I don't think so. He could have. He once tried to pick a fight with Gerald L.K. Smith, a fist fight, but my mother dragged him off of him. But no, he didn't. He suffered. His business was basically Jewish people. He had quite a few Polish customers, too, but no Germans in those days. And no, he didn't suffer from it. He just, emotionally he suffered from it. I'm sure everybody did in those days. But he managed to keep a straight head on his shoulders. But we were aware of it as I was, at least as his son. I knew that he was furious about what was going on and felt very, very helpless. So when the Jewish community started to organize, he was one of the people deeply involved from the beginning. And my dad was a very close friend of Isidore Sobolov's.
And who was?
Isidore Sobolov was the first director of the Federation. They happened to be close personal friends, and my father was a great supporter of his, as Sobey was a great supporter of my dad's, and they worked together, along with a lot of other people, Joe Holtzman and Lou Berry and people like that, who were the strong people in our community in those days. But that's when the Jewish community began to form and to be have an identity, and it became to be a factor to be dealt with. It wasn't just in Detroit, but all over the country. Jews started to assert themselves after World War II. And that's why today Jews are in the positions they're in, because they became a unified force. So we can thank those old-timers for that.
You mentioned some significant names. Were any of these people inspiring to you? Was there any person who encouraged you?
Well, Sobey got me involved, really. As a youngster, he got me involved in the Jewish community. He was very inspirational. I thought he was a very, very charismatic guy. He didn't look like it, but when he spoke, you listened. And so in getting involved with the Jewish community, he was very... One of the others who was really significant in terms of my involvement in the committee was Irwin Shaw, who was, when I met him, he was the head of the Jewish Community Center. And I always felt Irwin was a person who was not always given the recognition he deserved. He was a very important force in moving this community ahead. But I appreciated what he did. He got me involved with the center and with all kinds of things. And I was always grateful for that. He taught me a lot.
All right, let's go back for a moment to your childhood. What were you like in public school?
Oh, you want me to brag? I was wonderful in public school, private. I was a wonderful student. I was a bright kid. I was double promoted twice. I loved my teachers, and we got along wonderfully. School for me was wonderful. And I was a great athlete. I was a little kid, but I was fast, and I was agile, and I was good. I was a good athlete.
What sport did you play?
I used to play baseball and football, but in high school I was a tennis player. I played on my high school tennis team, and I still play tennis occasionally. But no, I was a happy kid. I was quite successful, and I was spoiled. I was successful in everything I tried, and not many people can say that. So I felt very gratified all the time that I was doing the good things and having a good time. I really did. Those were good days and I even got to the point where when the anti-Semite kids would pick on me, I'd fight back, and they stopped. It was interesting. The minute you asserted yourself, even if they beat you up, if you fought back, they didn't bother you anymore. That was a lesson I learned very, very early in my youth.
Where did you go to school?
Well, actually, I went to Winterhalter Elementary for kindergarten. Then we moved up to North Lawn, and I went to Bagley School. And I went from Bagley School to post-intermediate, and I graduated from Highland Park High. That was my early education. Then I went to the University of Michigan, where I got a BA in economics, and I never went out to any other education. I got married when I was 1 month before I graduated from college. I married this what's her name, and
what is her name?
Carolyn Greenberg is my wife, and you can check another one of these interviews. She's had one.
How about a maiden name?
Her name was Carolyn Kaplan, and as a matter of fact, our families were friends, so our parents were friends, so we knew each other. And we started a date when we were 16 years old. So when I got out of college and I was married, I had to go to work. So I did. And I went to work for my father in the insurance business for a very short time.
Well, I'm going to go back to that, but I want to know who your friends were.
My friends?
Growing up.
Oh, gosh. They're all still my friends.
That's who I want to know.
My friends are lifelong friends.
Any of them in the Jewish community whose names we recognize?
names you would recognize? Well, at the age of, I don't know what this is for the record, if anybody would like to know about this, but at the age of 13, no, age of 14, I think it was, I had my first date, and she was a little girl that I had gone to parties with, and we liked each other, and we spent a lot of time together. And for the next couple of years, we were out together all the time. Her name was Mary Ann Shapiro, who is now Mary Ann Schwartz, and who is still one of my dearest friends. And we are very close to this day, the two couples, obviously, Mary Ann and Alan. And as a matter of fact, Friday we're going to Stratford together, the four of us. So that's a pretty old friend. I was 13 years old. I could name you so many people that were my friends in those days and still are. Joe Isaacson, who was a doctor, and Irving Keene. These are people that I've known my entire life. And to me, a new friend is somebody I've only known for 15 years. But in those, all the people, I could name 30 or 40 people who I've known since I was 5 years old, that I still see. That's very unusual. This community is special in that regard. We keep our friends for a long, long time. So, and most of them are active in Federation too. They're people we've known since childhood, which is a nice warm feeling when you come into a room and your whole life history is sitting in front of you. So there are lots of them.
All right. We'll go on to your college days then. You mentioned that you majored in economics.
Right.
And I seem to recall that you were involved in some organizations. Oh,
gosh, yes. Well, I was president of the Association of Independent Men for a while, for a couple of years.
What is that?
Then I was drafted to join a fraternity, and I became president of the Pi Lam fraternity for a couple of years. I was a senior. I was in the Senior Honorary Society, the Druids at Michigan. I was tapped for that.
Why the Druids?
Why the Druids? That was what they were called. That was the Senior Honorary. That was for the literary school. And
the Independent Men's Association. What was that?
No. That was just. There were lots of men who lived in dormitories and didn't belong to fraternities, and in those days they had an organization. I don't know if it exists anymore. I tell you the truth, I've lost track. But we got together, a group that had been there, and I joined it, and then I became president, and that was my job at that point, aside from trying to learn something while I was in school. But I was involved in lots of different activities. I was chairman of the homecoming dance a couple times. I was my entertainment days. I got to meet all kinds of famous orchestra leaders, and Claude Thornhill, and I got to meet Nat Cole, King Cole, and lots of others. It was fun. Those were good days too, let me tell you.
And then there was Carolyn Kaplan.
Well, that was an ongoing story. We started dating when we were 16 and we were in high school. As a matter of fact, it was maybe 6 months before we graduated from high school, I started to take her out. And we were very close. I think it was kind of love at first sight, to tell you the truth. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be lasting. We just celebrated our 54th wedding anniversary, so evidently she's here to stay. I told her the trial period's almost over, and she can rest now. Anyway, we've had a great love affair all these years. And,
did she share your interests in various subjects, and Israel, for example?
Oh yeah, we've always been dedicated to Israel and all activities Jewish, and obviously the Federation. I spent I think I've been on the board of the Federation for maybe 30 years. I think I was on the executive committee for 25 years, 24 years, and all the different, all the different offices. I think I was vice president for something like 10 years, if I remember. And the center, of course, I was very active in this. I was president of the center. I may have told you that already. And I spent many years on that board, obviously. And as a matter of fact, I just finished. I chaired the fundraiser for the center that just was ended. We raised $37 million, so I felt very good about that. Although I'm not active in the center on an ongoing basis anymore, but I still am dedicated to it. It's a great organization. And an important part of our community, by the way. And I was on the JVS. Carolyn has been she was president of the women's division. You get all that in her bio, I'm sure. But we've always been, both of us have been very active. I'll never forget, if you want to hear a funny story, when I first joined the Federation, the first thing they did, they gave you pledge cards. And in those days, you used to take the pledge cards and go to the person's house and knock on the door. And the amount of money we were getting was very, very small in those days. But they gave me these pledge cards and said, okay, call on these people and get a pledge. So I was going from door to door in my neighborhood where I lived, which is in northwest Detroit. And I say, I'm here from the Allied Jewish Campaign, and I would like your pledge. And the fellow would say, well, how much did I pledge last year? I said, well, you pledged $20, but, the needs are great. I wish you'd give us see fit to give us an increase. How about $25? Okay, I'll pledge $25. This went on, and everywhere I went, I was getting increases. I was thinking, my goodness, I'm a natural. So I brought him in. I was very proud. I brought in the slips, and they looked at me and said, well, that's very good. He says, but did you look at the back of the slip? And I said, no. They said, well, these people haven't paid. We gave you all cards of people who hadn't paid their pledges. I said, well, no wonder they were so willing to give me an increase. They hadn't paid. That was my first experience with fundraising. So I wasn't such a natural.
Well, you are a natural, and we're going to go back to that.
Okay.
There is one aspect that we didn't bring up, I think, and that was your Army experience.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of important. It sounds as though it may have been during the Korean War.
It was the Korean War,
Can
right.
you tell me about your Army experience?
Well,
After you graduated from college?
I was married. I had a child already. No, I didn't have a child yet. That's right. Well, what happened was, I told you I was a tennis player. When I went to Michigan, I was going to play on the tennis team, and I had a physical. I don't know whether you want to know all this stuff. It's kind of. Well, anyway, I went to have a physical, and they found a spot on my lung. And they said, well, you can stay in school, but you cannot participate in any physical education activities. So I was not to be a tennis player anymore. And I didn't. Anyway, the spot stayed there. It didn't seem to change much. And when I was called to be drafted, they checked my records and they took an x-ray and they put me off as a deferment because of my illness. Or I didn't feel any illness. I was fine. Anyway, so Carolyn and I were married, and at that time we thought I was going to be going in the Army. But they deferred me. But 2 years later, they looked it over and said, well, it hasn't changed. We're going to draft you now. So that's when I went in. It must have been 1952. So from 52 through 54, I was in the Army. And I served, I went to school, out of the 24 months, I went to school 14 months. They trained me to be an electronic fire control specialist, if you will. You remember the Nike missile? That Nike missile, I was trained to teach people how to operate the electronics and how to repair them and so on and so forth, the control systems and all that stuff. So after 14 months, they sent me to England, would you believe, in the middle of the Korean War, and I became an instructor. I taught all the British and the American installations in England how to operate the Nike missiles. So that was my job in the Army. And then after doing that, actually they didn't get the missiles until 4 or 5 months after I got. So I only spent 5 months actually training people after all the money the government had spent educating me. It was pathetic. But nothing has changed. The Army always worked that way. And that was my Army career. But I went to England, and Carolyn, by that time we had a baby. And so Carolyn stayed here, and I was over there.
Tell me about the baby and the family.
Oh, the baby's name is Daniel Greenberg. He's very active in our community, too. He's been very active in Federation, in the Home for the Aged, all this stuff, like his great-grandfather. Mm-hmm. Or his grandfather was his grandfather. And he's married and his wife's name is Lana. They have 2 sons who are Matthew and Nathan. I have a daughter whose name is Amy. She lives in Oakland, California. She has 2 children. And I have...
And their names?
Their names? Mm-hmm. Well, the eldest is Ray. She's in her senior year in high school. And Eli, who is now 14. And my youngest son is Ned, who lives here in Detroit, and his wife's name is Elisa, and they have 3 children, and their names are Talia, Sam, and Bennett. Sam is named after my father, and Bennett's named after Carolyn's, sort of, grandfather. Anyway...
Who were you named for?
And what I named for?
Yeah.
My name is Hugh William. My grandmother's name was Hester, and her husband's name was William, Kyle.
Oh, okay.
So I was named after my maternal grandparents, both of whom were gone when I was born. I never knew them. I knew my father's parents, but I never knew my grandma on my mother's side. Mm-hmm. So that's how I got my name.
Oh,
Hugh from Hester. That's kind of a reach, but.
All right. Well, now we're going to have a little discussion of your involvement in the Jewish community.
Oh, I was never involved in the Jewish community.
Right.
Much.
Why did you become involved?
That's a very good question. Well, my father was, first of all. He was very active. And I would think that the truth of the matter is I was drafted by Sobey. He said on no uncertain terms, I had to get involved, that I was somebody who had a lot to offer, and that I should do it. And he made me feel like, you know what a guilt trip is? If you don't do it, you're not doing the right thing. Well, that's how it really started. And right after that, he suggested I get involved with an agency, and he sicked Irwin Shaw on me. Mm-hmm. And so I got involved in both of those almost simultaneously. And that was the beginning. And of course, I did get involved, and the more involved you get, the more involved you get. You know that. So it was kind of a natural progression. I just spent my whole life doing this kind of stuff. My whole life up till now. So that's how I got involved, and I found it gratifying. And I was very lucky. I did a lot of things that made me feel like I made a difference. You know, a lot of us do things, and you feel like you're going through the motions, and you're just like a rubber stamp or something like that. I didn't have that feeling. I really got involved, and I did things that made a real impact on our community, and that was very gratifying.
Tell me some of those.
Well, first of all, at the center, I took over as president of the center. I'd been involved for many, many years. But I took over at the center when they moved into Maple Drake, right after that. And there was huge problems. The building was not properly designed, and the costs of operating were terrible. And it was a whole huge undertaking that the community really hadn't prepared for. And I happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I became president right after that. And along with the help of the community, the Federation, obviously, we were able to put it on a more even keel. Not that the center has ever been a very self-sustaining organization, but it got to be more tolerable, at least in terms of what it could afford to do and what it could do. And those were really trying times, but I think that we did make a real impact at that time and made it a much happier place. So it still has its problems, and I don't think they will ever go away completely.
That wasn't your only experience with helping the center. You did this for the 10 Mile Center.
The fundraising? Oh, that was later on. I became sort of the official fundraiser for the center. This time, though, when I asked people for money, I made sure they had paid their pledges before. They weren't just adding on to their arrears. No, I did. I got to the point where I became a pretty good fundraiser, which is an interesting thing. I think if I have any criticism about our community now, we have no lay fundraisers anymore. The money is raised fundamentally by the professionals now. The real aggressive men who used to do this kind of thing are not evidenced anymore.
Why is that? Well,
I say this not in an unkind way, but the professionals have become very professional, and there are lots more of them, and they're more dedicated, and there are more of them, and they can do things that in the old days, the staff of the Federation was so small, they had to rely on all of the lay people to go out and be the arms and legs and the voice of the Federation. I remember when the major gifts were all raised by the leaders of the community. If somebody wanted a gift from somebody and a substantial amount of money, they would send out Joe Holtzman, or they'd send out Lou Berry, or they'd send out Paul Zuckerman, or Max Fisher, even in those days, would do the soliciting. And Sal Eisenberg, people like who were very active and very influential, and those are the people who went to their peers and asked them for money. And you don't see a lot of that now. I maintain you don't see any of it anymore. One of the last people in this community who could really did that was David Ermelin, who was a pretty decent fundraiser himself. But I talk to Bob Aronson even now, and aside from, frankly, from me, I don't know who goes out and raises money anymore, and for major projects. And of course, Bob and his staff do the major part of it, which is fine. I mean, the only problem is that is one aspect of involvement for younger people that they don't really get. They don't have that face-to-face knock heads with people to get them to give better gifts. And I think that something is missing when you don't do that. This is probably not an exclusive idea with me. There are others who believe that too, but I think it's a problem we should be facing. We should see if we can't get people, some of the younger people, to go out there and really do the soliciting.
Tell me about the Neighborhood Project.
The Neighborhood Project. That was one of my prides and joys. I was involved from day one. I was the first chairman of those days. We started out with the Home Loan Project. The Home Loan Project was a project in which, in order to encourage people to stay in the Oak Park, Southfield area, we tried to give them incentives to buy homes there, because the Jewish community had a huge investment in terms of homes, in terms of even the Jewish people owned a lot of the retail establishments in the 10 Mile Greenfield area. We had the Jewish Center there.
Synagogues.
Federation apartments were there. There are synagogues all over the place. And we felt it was very important to maintain that neighborhood is a Jewish neighborhood. So we started this home loan program in which we would loan anybody who didn't have the down payment for a house. We would loan them the equivalent of what the down payment was, and which made them qualify for a mortgage, and we stimulated people to buy homes. Initially, that was what it was. And I have to tell you, maybe I shouldn't go on record with this, I was the chairman of this thing, and I was really skeptical as to whether we could pull it off, whether it would really work, whether we could get people to borrow money and buy homes. And it started out very slowly, but within a few months, it was taking off like a jackrabbit. And we couldn't believe the success that we were having. And I will tell you that the fact that that neighborhood is what it is today is, I would say, 95% due to the neighborhood project. And the Federation was so far-sighted in doing what they did. They maintained the neighborhood, and it's today, the prices on those houses are unbelievable. They are, the neighborhood is burgeoning. It's not only in those days that we thought maybe it would only be an Orthodox community, but it's not. It's actually, as of now, it's about a third Orthodox Jews, a third Reform, believe it or not, and a third conservative. And the houses, after a while, they started loaning money to improve homes, not just to buy homes. If you wanted to put an addition on your house, something, they would loan them the money, and they paid it back. I don't think, last I heard, now maybe it's not true, there had never been a loan that wasn't paid back. Every single one of those loans we gave, and they were revolved. As we paid off, people paid us off, we would make more loans. And I understand, and at last I had heard there were probably 1,200 home loans that we made in that area, which meant that we encouraged 1,200 people to either stay in that area or move into that area. And we had programs that kept them there at the center. And one of the other things we did is, and I was deeply involved with this, me from my Reform background, we decided to, when B'nai Moshe, who had a synagogue on 10 Mile Road, decided to move out, we made it possible for Yeshiva Beth Yehuda to buy that building and turn it into a girls' school, because we felt that was very important in keeping the neighborhood Jewish and keeping it our ethnicity there. And it was not easy, but I sold it. And it's still there, and it's still operating. It's still struggling, and it always will, I suppose, just like the center. But it was a very important aspect of keeping that neighborhood Jewish.
Where did the loan fund come from?
The loan fund? Well, Federation. We had $750,000 that the Federation set aside for the home loans. They set aside $750,000, and from that we doled out, I think $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 was the most we'd ever gave in those days. But it was enough because it made it possible for people to qualify for mortgages.
Was the United Jewish Foundation involved in that?
Well, when I say Federation, the money comes from the foundation. In those days,
I know you were also involved in the foundation.
Oh yeah. They are, but I really don't differentiate it when it comes to the money. The money probably came from the foundation, but the Federation is the one who, as I recall, it was a Federation program. But to my knowledge, they got all the money back, and it was ended, I think, about 2 years ago. It's one of those programs that actually came to an end. We don't have many of those, but it did, because we felt that the need had passed, and we didn't have to do that anymore because the neighborhood is solid on its own now. It doesn't really need that kind of infusion. So you talk about feeling good about something you were involved in. I never fail to drive around in that neighborhood now and look at what's going on and feeling like, boy, we really did something here. The Federation should be really proud of that. And I don't think they publicize it enough, what they did in terms of saving that entire area. So they should. Somebody will make a movie about it or something. So that was one of the things I did, and I was very grateful for it.
No, I think your reach was beyond the Detroit Jewish community. I recall that you were the chair of the North American Youth Maccabi Games.
I was the first. I was involved in the formation of the Maccabi Games for the JWB in those days, Jewish Welfare Board, which is now the Jewish Community Centers Association. Oh yeah, I was the first commissioner, if you will, of the games. And we started out on a very with one venue with 1,000 kids or something like that. I don't remember what city it was, but that program has become the salient program, as far as I'm concerned, for the Jewish Community Center Association today. They have thousands of kids every year going to these games now. They may have 2 or 3 venues at one time, because of different school schedules, you know, and the amount of Jewish identification that has been garnered from those games is incalculable. It really is. Kids who had no other Jewish identity, when it came to sports, this was their way into being Jewish. And many of them, and I know from first-hand experience, who probably never would have identified very much as being Jewish, through getting them in through the athletic programs, made them committed Jews. And the friendships that have been made all over the country, all over the world. I hear stories all the time, still do. I'm not involved with that either on a close basis. But I remember when I was, you couldn't believe. And of course with emails now. And these kids from Israel are corresponding to kids from Philadelphia and from all over, and they've become fast friends, and the impact was just unbelievable, and it was a thrilling thing to see. I must have been at 10 games, and it was my job to say, let the games begin, you know, and to see the parade, if you will, at the beginning of the games, and seeing these kids marching in with the signs from wherever they came from. And they were all the cities in the United States, but all the countries of the world, Mexico. We had one had them from Argentina, Romania. We had contingents of Jewish kids from all over the world. And they had an experience that was absolutely incomparable. I could tell you a funny story. I was at the games. We had the games in Chicago, and I was sitting at the dais there at the games, and sitting next to me was the mayor of Chicago. His name was Washington at the time, and the kids are all marching in, and we had kids from everywhere, and the contingent from Los Angeles came in, and they're marching in, and there are 3 tall black kids in this contingent. And the mayor looks at this, and he nudges me, and he says, I said, I thought you said this was for Jewish kids. And I said, yes, it is. It's really all for Jewish kids. He says, he points to the contingent from Los Angeles and says, look, he says, there's 3 black kids here. He says, how come? I said, well, there are 3 possibilities. So first of all, one of them, or they may be from Ethiopia. That's one possibility. The other one is that they may be Jewish kids. There are black Jewish kids, and there are kids who have been adopted by Jewish families who are black, and they are being raised Jewish. He said, yeah. I said, and the third possibility is Los Angeles just wants to win. Well, I thought he was going to fall out of his seat. I could still see him laughing. He would laugh so hard. But I did check into him. And these were kids who had been adopted by Jewish families. All 3 of them. You know, Jewish people do things like that. And they were raised Jewish, and these were really Jewish kids. And they did win. Anyway, that's a little side story about those games. But that was another gratifying experience, that whole part of my life that I spent with the games. And the other part of it that's so great is they're going gangbusters now. They're just doing so well. And it was a funny thing. And I will tell you this, it was not easy selling the JWB on the whole concept. I worked very hard to get them to realize that this was a way to get kids to identify as Jews.
What was the origin of the idea?
Well, the origins were, there was a Maccabi group who started this on a very small basis, Maccabi America. And there was a Maccabi Games of Canada, youth, and the JWB together had on a very limited basis done this, but it was very small. And Mort Plotnick, who was at that point was the president of the Jewish president, I think when he was executive director of the Jewish Center, talked to me about it and said that, you know, this is something that we should capitalize on it. And so we called a meeting of all these organizations and told them that they were handling it the wrong way, that there should not be three organizations trying to do the whole thing, that one organization should be doing it with the help of the others, but one had to take the lead and actually make it happen, and that the natural one to do it was the JWB, because they had the connection with all the Jewish centers all over the country, which is where the kids were. Well, you know, in all of these things, there's always a turf war. It's not all these other organizations. Well, you know what? This is our thing, you know. And so try to get them to be amenable to the marriage, if you will, and to take a secondary role was not easy. But and this was also had to be done in a cooperation with the Maccabi Games in Israel, because they have the name, they own the name. So we had to get the Israelis to buy into the idea of having youth games named Maccabi. So probably a year and a half, 2 years before we could even get everybody in line to do this. But finally it fell into place, and we started the organization. And my reward was that I became the first commissioner of the whole games, which goes to prove my most favorite theory is that no good deed goes unpunished. And so I did that for quite a few years. Then I said, you know, it's time for somebody else to do this. And so they put another person. And but by that time it was already a howling success. By that time we had been in Chicago and Baltimore and Toronto and Detroit a couple times. So, but when I get my newsletter from the JWB or the JCCA now, and every year, and they talk about all the different venues and where it's going and how many kids are involved, and we're talking about thousands of kids every year. So it's quite an impact. Anyway, that was a wonderful, good feeling that I had. See, when I told you before that I've had a lot of reward, because it's not. I would say this. I've always been involved in the Allied Jewish campaign, and I've collected money and I solicited money and sent money, but you never had the same direct reward that you knew exactly what your money had done, or your time, really, not even the money. But you never felt there was a causal effect relationship that you did this and here's what happened. So that's why in these cases I was very lucky to have this kind of satisfaction.
That's a great segue into the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee.
Oh, wow. Yeah, my all-time favorite. That is, without question, the most effective meaningful organization in Jewish life.
The Joint.
The Joint. And it's not well known. I mean, not as well publicized as it should be, what their role has been in history in terms of the Jewish people, what they have done.
What role did you play?
They saved lives everywhere. I mean, you hear about Jews having problems in Argentina, Jews having problems in India, Jews having problems in Eastern Europe, in former Soviet Union, even before it was the former Soviet Union, when it was still the Soviet Union. They were always there in some role, and very often sub rosa. They were there under a different name. They were there under different auspices, funneling food, money to organizations or to people in all these countries. And what they've done through history, I mean, I'm talking about through the 20th century anyway, in terms of being there and saving lives. And if you really want to feel good about what you've given to the Allied Jewish Campaign, you have to do what we did. We traveled around in parts of the world where the Joint has been important. I mean, since World War II, you don't even hear about them, but what they're doing is amazing. But we were fortunate. We went to Bulgaria and Hungary.
Who's we?
My wife and I, Carolyn, and with others I was on the Eastern Europe Committee of the Joint for a few years, and to have people come up to you and touch you like you're something sacred because you're from the Joint. I mean, it was embarrassing. And they'd say to you, if it weren't for you, we'd all be dead. And what do you mean? We have no food, we'd have no shelter, no medical care, and they list all the things that the Joint does for them. And everywhere you went, this is what happened. Old people, young people, it didn't make any difference. But the best known name in the Jewish world is the Joint.
Or JDC, also known as the JDC?
Yes, American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, commonly known as the Joint. But it is, to these people, it's almost sacred. I mean, they said, most of them say that we would not be able to exist without the Joint. First of all, we'd starve. We don't have any food. So, it makes you really feel like you're representing somebody who makes a real impact. And I've always felt, that's another pet peeve of mine, I've always felt that we at the Federation here do not publicize. We're always talking about what we're doing for Israel, which is fabulous, obviously, and it's probably number one. But this other aspect of saving these lives all over the world through the Joint is not given enough recognition. And the professional level of the people, it is so inspirational to meet these people. They go and they live in these places. They live in Hungary, or they live in Romania, which is a hellhole. I mean, Romania is a third world country. Poverty it's hard to believe, is common. And these Joint people go and they live there, and they live with these people. And they're dedicating their lives to this kind of activity. I don't know people like that. In my society, people are out looking out for themselves most of the time. But I don't know where they find them. I do know where they find them. They find them all over the world. Some of the people from the Joint are from South America. Some are from Israel. Some are from Europe. And they are just totally amazing people. So another good feeling. That's one of my good feelings.
Is there any particular incident that comes to mind when you think of the trips that you've taken?
Oh, well, I could list you 100 of them. One of them, we walked into this woman's house, her house. It was a room maybe 12 by 12. It was her entire house. It was her. she didn't have any inside plumbing. This is in Romania, mind you. This is not a new African country. It's in Romania. She had a wood stove. She had no refrigerator. She had a little a bed, a little table, a chair. And she was old. Her husband had died. She was on relief in Romania, which meant nothing. I mean, she got nothing. She had to decide between eating and putting wood in her stove, because she couldn't afford both. And the joint was keeping her alive. And she had, the lighting in the room was one light bulb in the middle of her room. And when we came in, somebody turned the light on. And she got very upset because she couldn't afford to pay for the light bulb. Until we understood what was about, we turned off the light. She was much happier because she couldn't pay for electricity. She had no income. But the gratitude that she had for the joint was just unbelievable. She knocked us all out. She really did. And everywhere, it wasn't just there. Everywhere we went, the impact was that they had old folks' homes. That they support. They have a camp for children in Hungary. We were there for the 10th anniversary of the camp. They, along with Ron Lauder, formed this camp. And they bring kids in from all over that area, from Hungary, Bulgaria. The camp was in Hungary, by the way, but they kids from Romania, all the different surrounding countries. And they bring them in there, and they teach them what Judaism's all about. Because during World War II and thereafter, it was not popular to be Jewish. And a lot of these kids never knew they were Jewish. Their parents never told them. And they didn't know. We met young people in their 20s and 30s who had just found out that they were Jewish. And the kids come from all over, and they get an indoctrination in what it is to be Jewish. They teach them prayers, they teach them the holidays, and for most of them, this is their first, though they are Jewish, it's their first experience being Jewish. Mm-hmm. And they are just amazing what they do. The interesting part about it is, you keep in mind that these kids are coming from all different countries. They come from Finland, they come from former Soviet Union. There's no common language. So whatever they do, they have to do it in 5 languages at the same time. And the staff is Israeli, by the way. And they know how to get it so that they all sing together and they play together, and they're totally different languages.
Speaking of Israel,
mm-hmm.
You've been there, I think, many times.
I've been to Israel many, many times, yeah.
And
I've been involved in a lot of programs for Israel.
There was one mission in particular that I read about, the "Who is a Jew?" question.
Oh, I was there a couple times on that issue, the "Who is a Jew?" issue.
In what capacity?
I don't remember. I think I represented Detroit. I think whoever was the executive director asked me if I would go because he knew how strongly I felt about the issue.
What is that issue?
Well, the issue is, at that point in time, the definition of who was a Jew was being left pretty much to Israel. And the Orthodox community was very narrow as far as we were concerned in how a Jew was being defined. So you had to be Orthodox to be Jewish. You had to follow all Orthodox traditions, and everything had to be done by those measurements. And it didn't work for everybody. I mean, it was interesting. On our mission were people from other parts of the country. I mean, There were, I think there were about 11 of us, all from the United States. And we met with all, we went with the Knesset, with many members of the Knesset. We met with the Prime Minister, and we met with the outgoing Prime Ministers, all from both sides, Likud and we're stressing the fact that this was intolerable to us as Americans. And because, first of all, some of the people in our tour, on the group, were not born Jewish. Some of them had a mother who was not Jewish and a father who was, and were strongly identified with the Jewish community from all over the country. People from California, everywhere. The definition that was given was totally unacceptable to us as to who was a Jew. And they were trying to put it into even stricter law in terms of maintaining that the definition was very narrow and you didn't deviate from it. And the battle goes on, by the way. This is not over. But we were able at that point to get them to back off. They stopped trying to narrow the gap, and we narrow the restriction as to who was Jewish. I don't know whether we did it ourselves, but we were part of an ongoing program, I suppose, from a lot of different people.
Yitzhak Shamir was the Prime Minister at that time?
Shamir, yeah. And he listened. He said when he came to us, he could give us 20 minutes. That was it. He stayed for 2.5 hours. We told him that he was making a terrible mistake. That first of all, he was going to alienate probably the largest number of Jews in the world were not did not agree with him. With him, he was prepared to let it go through, because the Orthodox politically have a lot of impact, even though they're not the huge numbers, but they do have an impact. And we had to tell them, they're conservative Jews, they're Reform Jews, who are the largest bodies of Jews in the world, and you cannot ignore them. But I mean, some of the people who made speeches there, I was mild. I didn't. But there was a young woman who got up and said, I have a home here in Israel. I raised my children Jewish. My mother was not Jewish. My father was Jewish. I'm a dedicated Jew. I said, and she pointed her finger and said, and you are not going to tell me I'm not Jewish. And she pointed her finger right in his face. Young, adorable girl. And he was taken aback. He really listened to her. You're not going to tell me I'm not Jewish, or my children aren't Jewish. And she said, I spent my whole life dedicated to Israel and to the Jewish cause. You're not going to say that. She took off on it. He was, and there were others like that. Actually, many of the people who were in the group were, by the new definition, were not really Jewish. Well, some of them didn't know where they were Jewish. They could not prove it. One of them had come from Poland, a young man, and he was told he was Jewish. But he wasn't really sure. He didn't know whether his mother was Jewish. And he had no way to tell. She had died or something. And he didn't know. His father was gone. But he's a big shot in the Jewish community. And his attitude was the same. Who are you to tell me whether I'm Jewish or not? So it was a striking experience, let me tell you. And it did have some impact, evidently. But it's an ongoing, the ongoing battle between the Orthodox community and the rest of the Jews as to who makes the decisions about all these things. So, and every prime minister who comes into power wants to stay on good terms with the Orthodox community, because they, for some reason, worked out they're the swing votes all the time as to who's going to govern in Israel. So, anyway, that was a fascinating experience. But I did it twice. I think I went twice in a matter of a year and a half on the same issue. But others went on other missions too, did it. And there were a lot of uproar about it.
Well, we've kind of come full circle. You started in Detroit with your birth here at Women's Hospital. Now we're coming back to Detroit. As a lifelong Detroiter, you continue to be involved in the city.
Yeah, well, I've done other things too, yeah. But
Detroit Institute of Arts, I believe?
oh yeah, I was involved with that.
Detroit Symphony?
Oh yeah, I was on the board of the Detroit Symphony. Those are all interests that we have, you know. That are
United Foundation?
Oh yeah, I was on the board. I was on the foundation. I forgot about those things. I'm not anymore. I'm not in any of those anymore. First of all, you only stay on for a certain period of time. Then they make room for other people, which is as it should be. I'm a great believer in having people leave after a while. You make room for new, younger people. The other part of it is that I spend a good part of the year in Florida now, so that I'm not really here most of the winter when you should be active and doing things if you're here.
Where's your heart?
There? Here. I'm a Detroiter. I mean, I will always be a Detroiter. And that's a very interesting question, because they would like to pirate us away down there and have you become Floridians, you know, for very practical reasons. But no, our roots are all here. Our family's here. Even if our family weren't here, this is where our history is. You know, we've grown up here.
In recognition of what you and your wife Carolyn have done for the community, you received the Butzel Award in 2000.
I got a half a Butzel Award.
Half a Butzel.
She got the other half.
Any special thoughts about that?
Oh, well, it's very gratifying, and it's an incredible honor. I mean, this is the best we have to offer to our people. And it's something we will always cherish and always try to live up to. It's really a challenge to say you better keep doing whatever you've been doing, and we will do that, I'm sure. It's nice to be involved in a group of people who you know, have been so involved in our community. And when I gave my speech, I noted the fact that, looking back on it, I have known every single one of the Butzel Award winners from the day one. It's Julian Krolik, I knew as a young kid. I knew him. I knew every single one of them. And it's hard to believe. It's now probably 54 years or so they've been giving it. 51 was the first Butzel Award. And I wasn't there at the award, but I knew the man because he was a friend of my dad's too, and as a matter of fact, his daughter was a good friend of mine, and every single one of them, I knew them all. I knew them. I mean, not just passing. I knew them quite well, every one of them. So it felt good to be added to that group, and they were all amazing guys and women. So I feel wonderful about it.
What legacy would you leave to your children and grandchildren? What life's lesson would you like to pass on to them?
Oh, that's the easiest thing in the world, to tell them what they should do. I think that it's very important to give back. You have to be worried about other people as well as yourself. And it's a Jewish tradition, let's face it. And so I think it's very important for them to maintain their Jewish identity and to be proud of it and to pass on the good things about being Jewish to their kids, which they are doing, and to try to make the world a better place. It really is. I should tell you, my youngest son, this is probably nothing, maybe you'll be interested, but last Monday, my son was made the president of Gleaners and the Oakland County Food Bank. He just engineered the merger of those two agencies. About a week and a half ago, they concluded the merger, and they elected him president of the organization. which is a great tradition. You know, feeding the poor and the hungry is what he's very much into, and he's great at it. He will be a great leader in the city. He really will. So that's kind of gratifying right there. This just happened this week, so if you'd interviewed me a week ago, I wouldn't have been able to tell you about that.
Is there anything I've neglected to ask that you'd like to add?
Is there anything you've neglected to ask? Let me think. I'm trying to think of the things that I've been involved with. I think you've hit the highlights. I mean, well, the Federation itself. You know, just in terms of what I've seen happen to the Federation in terms of its growth and the fact that it has become a spokesman, if you will, for us. It's going back to what I started to tell you about when I was young. There was no organized Jewish community. None, really. We were just individual synagogues. We were individual people. There was no voice, if you will, no central location, if you will. And all the agencies were independent. They weren't all under one, you know, organization. And a lot of them were raising money by themselves, independently. So the formation of the Federation in itself was a landmark occasion for this community. And as I said before, for all the communities in the United States. We have these, you know, UJC, and, which is now having a little struggle, but point is, there was never any place like that that was the home that spoke for Jews, if you will, in the United States. So the fact that people like B'nai B'rith are around, and the American Jewish Committee and all those, it's added a lot of luster to being Jewish, and of course a good part of it came from the state of Israel being formed. So we got to be grateful to them too, as well as they're grateful to us. But I think we've covered all my bases, the things that have made me feel good. So I hope that people continue to be inspired to make the community grow. And they are. There's a lot of young people now who are coming forward to take over, which is great. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.